there are a few things I'd recommend, which is keep laws short. Long laws, it's like that's something suspicious is going on if there's a long law.
A lot of the time, the best thing that government can do is just get out of the way.
What do you think the role of government should be?
I think the role of government should be that of like a referee, but not a player on the field. Generally, government should, I think, just try to get out of the way and not impede progress. I think there's a general problem, not just in the US, but in most countries, where the rules and regulations keep increasing every year. Rules and regulations are immortal. They don't die. There's not a natural. Occasionally, you see some law with a sunset provision, but really, otherwise, the vast majority of rules and regulations live forever. And so, if more rules and regulations are applied every year, and it just keeps growing and growing, eventually, it takes longer and longer, and it's harder to do things. And there's not really an effective garbage collection system for removing rules and regulations. And so gradually this hardens the arteries of civilization, where you're able to do less and less over time. So I think government should be really trying hard to get rid of rules and regulations that perhaps had some merit at some point, but don't have merit currently. But there's very little effort in this direction. This is a big problem. Yeah, I mean, government is a corporation in the limit. So it is the most corporate thing. It is maximum corporation, but it's also a monopoly, and also is the only one that's allowed legally to do violence. So why would you want to give a corporation with no competition that can't even really go bankrupt more money? Now, it's not as though I think the government shouldn't exist, or that there are not good things that the government can do, or things that are necessary for the government to do. For example, science programs where we send a probe to Mars, and the value of that is it's a small amount of value for all citizens, but it would be inefficient to sort of go and collect $10 from every citizen for a Mars probe. And so therefore it's better to have the government do something like that, like a heavy science program, rather than try to collect small amounts of money from everyone. So I'm not somebody who's sort of an extreme libertarian and thinks the government should not do anything. I just think we should minimize what the government does, because the government's efficiency at spending is just going to be lower than a competitive commercial company, but by a lot. If you look at, say, East Germany versus West Germany, or North Korea versus South Korea, and you look at the GDP per capita of East and West Germany or North and South Korea, the difference is gigantic. And that's just the difference, say, between East and West Germany. Or, it's like a random line was drawn, basically, depending on where the Red Army was and where the Allied troops were. And East Germany's productivity was like at least 5 times worse than West Germany. And it's not like West Germany was like some bastion of capitalism. They were quite socialist, really. So there may be as much as an order of magnitude difference between the efficiency of a competitive private company versus the government.
The challenge here is that government regulatory authorities tend to be set up in reaction to something bad that happened. So if you look at, say, aircraft or cars, the cars were unregulated at the beginning. Aircraft were unregulated, but they had lots of airplane crashes, and in some cases manufacturers that were cutting corners, and a lot of people were dying. So the public was not happy about that, and so they established a regulatory authority to improve safety. And now commercial airliners are extremely safe. In fact, they're safer than if you were to drive somewhere. the safety per mile of a commercial airliner is better than a car. And cars are also extremely safe compared to where they used to be. But if you look at, say, the introduction of seatbelts, the auto industry fought the introduction of seatbelts as a safety measure for, I think, 10 or 15 years before finally the regulators made them put seatbelts in cars. And that greatly improved the safety of cars. And then airbags were another big improvement in safety. So my concern is that with AI, if there's something bad, if something goes wrong, the reaction might be too slow from a regulatory standpoint.
Part of the role of government is to make sure the public is safe, like to take care of public safety issues. And I think the right move is to establish some government regulatory agency, which at first is just there to gain insight. So it's not about like shooting from the hip and just putting in rules before anyone knows anything. But you got to set up the agency. It's got to gain insight. Once that insight is gained, then start applying rules and regulations. We have that for for aircraft, the FAA. We've got that for cars. We've got that for drugs, for food. And I don't think anyone wants the FAA to go away or the FDA to go away or any of those regulatory agencies. I think we just need to make sure people do not cut corners on AI safety. It's going to be a real big deal, and it's going to come on like a tidal wave.
A monopolistic corporation in the limit is the government. So, this is not to say people who work for the government are bad. If those same people are taken and put in a better sort of operating system situation, the outcome will be much better. So it's really just what is the responsiveness of the organization to maximizing the happiness of the people, and so you want to have a competitive situation where it's truly competitive, where companies aren't gaming the system, and then where the rules are set correctly, and then you need to be on the alert for regulatory capture, where the referees are in fact captured by the players, which is and the players should not control the referees, essentially, which can happen.
A lot of the push for higher government involvement and expropriation of assets by the government is really pushed by a bunch of politicians who are actually saying that resources shouldn't be in control of people, of private individuals. They should be in control of the government. They're basically saying they want control of the assets. I mean, I think in terms of things that people should perhaps get upset about is I think getting upset about excess consumption is a thing to get upset about, but if somebody's just wasting money on personal luxuries in a crazy way.
So I think I think most likely the form of government on Mars would be somewhat of a direct democracy, where you vote on issues, where people vote directly on issues, instead of going through representative government. When the United States was formed, representative government was the only thing that was logistically feasible, because there was no way for people to communicate instantly. A lot of people didn't even have really access to mailboxes, or there wasn't even really the post office was very primitive. A lot of people couldn't write. So you had to have some form of representative democracy, or things just wouldn't work at all. But I think on Mars, most likely it's going to be everyone votes on every issue, and that's how it goes. There are a few things I'd recommend, which is keep laws short. Long laws, it's like that's something suspicious is going on if there's a long law. If the size of the law exceeds the word count of Lord of the Rings, which it does, amazingly, then it's like something's wrong. So there should be a limit to the size of the law that you should be able to digest it. Like, how come you can read the Constitution and all of the amendments, like you can read those in maybe an hour? and we govern so much of our civilization by that, and yet modern law is this obtuse, super boring tome that's indecipherable to almost anyone. So I think direct democracy, laws that are comprehensible. I think having some kind of hysteresis on, like, it should be easier to remove a law than create one, because things just get to inertia. You have to have something that's going to overcome inertia. So probably, I don't know what the right number would be, maybe it's like 60-40. Maybe it requires 60% to get a law in place, but any number above 40% can remove a law. Otherwise, you just get laws just accumulate over time, and it's sort of like Gulliver, where you just get trapped by all these tiny strings and you can't move. You get hardening of the arteries of civilization with rules and rules and rules and rules. So it should be just easier to get rid of a rule than to put one in. Maybe they should even have like some kind of sunset clause, so that they just automatically expire unless there's enough of an impetus to keep them around.
A lot of the time, the best thing that government can do is just get out of the way. And so I would say that's the default, probably the best thing to do. Then after that would be ensuring that there are not artificial monopolies, that there is a fertile ground for startups, and because what can happen over time is that you can get regulatory capture by large companies, where they influence the regulators and the legislators to favor their situation, and then you have a forest of redwoods, and you just can't. The little trees can't grow. So we really want to have an environment that tends to favor smaller companies and startups. The big companies really don't need the support, but they will generally try to work the system to establish a monopoly of some kind. We should be wary of that.
So you do see some good in government when it comes to regulation and stuff like that. But you don't generally think the government can spend your money more effectively than you can.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, generally I'm like, I think, pretty moderate. I'm not like sort of an extreme libertarian. I think there are roles for the government that make sense. Like, I don't think we necessarily want like a private army or private police force or private. Yeah, I think there's certain things that are probably the right role for the government. But anything done by the government is going to be inefficient, because the government is a monopoly. Like, people that don't like corporations should not somehow think that the government is much better because the government is a corporation in the limit. It is the ultimate corporation with a monopoly on violence. So like, I think the right role for the government is like to be act in a regulatory capacity, we should aspire to have the government be a limited actor in the economy. So you could say, like, what percentage of economic output should be government, and maybe a third or something like that. Once you start getting above 50% government, I think that's problematic.
If I may say, that we want to avoid creating a civilizational risk by having, frankly, this may sound a little odd, too much cooperation between governments. If you look at, say, at history and the rise and fall of civilizations, really all throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen, but it hasn't meant the doom of humanity as a whole, because there've been all these separate civilizations that were separated by great distances. And so, say, like, while Rome was falling, Islam was rising, and so you had like the sort of caliphate doing incredibly well while Rome was doing terribly. And that actually ended up being a source of preservation of knowledge and many scientific advancements. And so I think we want to be a little bit cautious about being too much of a single civilization, because if we are too much of a single civilization, then if the whole thing may collapse. Now, I'm obviously not suggesting war or anything like that, but I think we want to be a little bit wary of actually cooperating too much. It sounds a little odd, but we want to have some amount of civilizational diversity such that if something does go wrong with some part of civilization, that the whole thing doesn't collapse and humanity keeps moving forward.